Hello, Ben, and welcome to the University Research Podcast.
Hi, Andy.
It's good to have you here. How's your day going?
Oh, all good, all good. Marking at this time of year, mainly.
Yeah, it's that season for sure.
It is,
Well,
yes.
It's a nice month to have these results from the Research Excellence Framework and to talk about some of the work that we've been, I think, sitting on a little bit quietly for the last few months, and it's fantastic to learn more about your work. So tell us first of all what you do at the university.
So I'm a senior lecturer in audio technology in School of Science, Engineering and Environment, and I do research in the Acoustics Research Centre at Salford as well.
Fantastic. And we like to start things off by finding out a bit about each person's journey into their research. So tell us a little bit about where it began for you. How did you get into this world of research?
Well, so I was always interested in sound. And then when I was originally at Salford, I was a technician, and I started off making test interfaces for other people's research and building interesting boxes out of bits of fruit machines and so on, hacked into the back of an old Macintosh keyboard to try and get results and so on out. And got quite interested in the research. So when I got the academic position, I was quite keen on doing that and started looking at kind of personalizing media, and a lot of that's been around accessibility and improving different technologies, initially for people with visual impairment and then with hearing impairment, and then it focused on broadcast and hearing impairment, and from there there's a kind of natural progression into personalizing broadcast for all sorts of reasons, whether it's different devices or different specific needs like visual impairment or hearing impairment or dementia even we looked at, or just for different devices and for more engagement and more enjoyment for different audiences.
I mean, that's really fascinating. We have lots of incredible technicians at the university. I wonder how easy, or how did you make that transition from technician into that research role? Was it quite a natural thing, or was it a big sort of decision to make that step?
Well, I was one of the first two technician demonstrators in what was then a very new role, and so as part of that, I took classes, and then there was some classes that they didn't have a lecturer to do, so I got some part-time teaching on top of that, and that expanded to the point where I think I was doing 22 hours a week part-time lecturing on top of a full-time technician demonstrator role. And the university was kind enough to pay for me to do a MSc day release. So, and after that, I applied for and got an academic role, and then did PhD and so on. It rolled on from there. So it felt like I've been at the university for a long time, but I've never had the same job for more than about 3 years.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because so many of our researchers that I've spoken to over the last year or so in this podcast, they've had such very different journeys and often quite not bumpy, but varied roles, actually. And they've gone through different disciplines. We've had people working in physics, working in medicine, people working in art, working in artificial intelligence. So I think that research journey is really quite a complex one for everyone. And it's interesting to hear about yours. So it seemed like a real commitment to, I guess, addressing fundamental sort of accessibility issues in acoustics was a big part of what you've worked on over the years.
That was a lot of it. There was a friend of mine who was a research psychologist that worked in accessibility, and it was him that got me interested in that. We'd have long conversations over dinner and so on about different elements of perception, and that was what it came down to, perception. So, and all of the research, even so, there's the accessibility research I do, but also the stuff that we're talking about today in terms of the sports broadcast is all about perception and manipulating or personalizing the broadcast or the experience of a live event to change the way it's perceived and to increase engagement and immersion and all those things, excitement, all of those kind of things. So it's kind of a natural progression, and I still do both the accessibility and the kind of more general broadcast stuff as well.
And it must be quite hard, I think, to make sure something is accessible to such varied abilities and personal sort of preferences as well. That must be quite a challenge.
It is, because even if you try to make something accessible for someone who has a hearing impairment, every hearing impairment is different, and everybody has a different experience of that. That's where the idea of not just making better sound for someone who's hard of hearing or someone who has visual impairment, but making a broadcast so that it could be personalized regardless of what people's needs or requirements or just preferences are.
I mean, it certainly sounds like a lot has changed over the years with regards to sort of acoustic innovation, especially well, perhaps particularly when we get to the personal aspects of enjoying events. So tell us a little bit about the case study, and we know a little bit that it's sort of a way of innovating with live sports performances. So tell us a bit about the background of the case study.
So I suppose it all started with a big European project that I led Salford's part of. It was 11 project partners from around Europe. This is a project that ran 2010 to 2013. And the idea was to take a live event, and we did sports events and music and dance events and everything. Instead of broadcasting the producer's view of what that looked like, essentially broadcasting the entire event in a framework so that the viewer at home could navigate around that. So almost like broadcasting an event like a computer game, so that you could walk around it, you could experience it from different places, you could choose how you experienced it and so on. And we were responsible for the audio side of that. And we very quickly figured out that if we were watching so the first case study we did was a football game at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea Wolves it was. And you could take your viewpoint and take it across the pitch to go and see what the manager was doing on the bench, or to follow a particular player around. There was a virtual director that was driven by artificial intelligence, where you could tell it which player you wanted to follow, or all of that kind of thing. But as you were moving across the pitch, of course, the sound of the ball kicks and the whistle blows would have to go behind you. So we had to mix the broadcast audio in an object-based way. And this is before object-based audio was really a thing. But essentially, we defined audio within the scene in the same way that you do with a computer game. It has certain characteristics. It has a coordinate location, and you can move past that location, and you could interact with it in some way. So you might want more commentator, or you might hate that commentator and want to get rid of him altogether. You might want more crowd sound, or you might want those big cinematic boom kicks from the when the ball's kicked and so on. So we kind of designed that from the bottom up as an object-based system. And there was, I think, 3 different spin-outs came out of that, which have been really successful. One of those being Salsa Sound, which we started from Salford, which is a spin-out company that myself and my partner in the business, Rob Oldfield, started with a lot of support from the university, who helped us through the process. After initially telling us what a bad idea it was to do a spin-out and how onerous it would be as a director of a spin-out company, and when we wouldn't be cowed and we're still determined, they backed us 100% with it, with all the kind of legals and the advice and all those kind of things behind it. So once we established, Rob and I had essentially kept on working on the technology beyond the project, because we got to the end of the project and put together a little video of what we'd done with the audio side of things, and realized that we'd completely automated the mixing of a live football match, the audio of it, and thought there's got to be some money in this somewhere. We should keep working on this. So we kept working on it from 2013 through to 2017, when we founded the company and actually started the company. And we did a bunch of trade shows and conferences and so on before the company formed, and kept on doing that, working with a bunch of different big broadcast organizations and integrating it into their systems. And all the time it was kind of improving. And it was still all object-based audio under the hood, but the broadcasters weren't quite ready for that yet. So we were having to take a few steps back to be where the broadcasters were, so that our technology could be useful. And we started getting quite a few successes with that. So we won a Royal Academy of Engineering fellowship for Rob. So again, we got some money from them, and we got a swanky office in London and lots of support and training and mentoring and things like that. We started winning a bunch of other awards from the International Association of Broadcast Manufacturers and a couple of other organizations. And then we won a competition with Manchester City Football Club, which I thought was a local competition because it's Manchester City and so on. So I put together an entry for it, basically saying we would give their fans all over the world the experience virtually of being in the best seat of the house at the Etihad Stadium, with all the atmosphere and excitement of the live game. And just before we went along for this week-long kind of competition with them, I actually looked up some more details of the competition and realized it was actually organized by City Football Group, who are huge and own 8 different football clubs in big cities all around the world. And they're enormous. And there were competition entries from Texas and all around Europe and all over the place. Anyway, we won it. So they funded us to develop this thing where we would be able to do this incredible virtual sound event for their fans wherever they were. And they really liked it. They really liked the technology and so on. And we started doing some focus groups with some of their fans that they bust in for these, who absolutely loved it and got really excited about it. So they started putting out, because they have rights to put out football highlights and full game replays and things like that, sort of a couple of hours after the game finishes, although they can't do it live. So although we were creating the audio live, they were putting it out a little bit later, and we were getting fantastic feedback from all of that. And the first live game we were going to do was going to be Manchester City versus Real Madrid in March 2020, and we were really pumped up for this. This was where it was all going to kick off. And 4 days before the game, of course, everything went into lockdown, and all sport was cancelled with no end in sight. And we thought, this is the end of a small company. You know, we can't survive not having any live sport going on anyway. That's our livelihood. And then Manchester City came to us and said, we think that when we're going to get back to playing, that it's going to be an empty stadium. What can you do to make it sound better? So we thought, okay, so we've developed all this technology around artificial intelligence and automatically mixing the entire game of the football and all the on-pitch sounds and the crowd sound and things like that. Maybe we can adapt and we can repurpose some of this technology to create some virtual crowd stuff. And we took a slightly different approach to everybody else that decided to do that. And I think Sky had a guy that I know actually from Dolby sitting behind a huge mixing console with a couple of laptops with Ableton running and loads of different faders. And it was a hugely skilled job. And they did a great job of it, to be fair, of doing this kind of virtual crowd sound. And we took the approach with Manchester City, kind of collaborative, that it should be more like a crowd DJ, and that the operator should be just someone that understands the club and understands the game. And it should be really simple and intuitive to use. So we put together an interface where on a touch screen where you could just basically move your finger around. And by doing that, you were controlling something like 15 different loops processed in different ways, which would be different mixes of those would be playing depending where you had your finger on the screen. So you could control the whole crowd of a game just by moving your finger around. It was really easy to do in real time. And then there was a bunch of buttons on the far side for kind of home goal, away goal. The ironic cheer was one of the most used buttons that the opposition put the ball out, which was hilarious. And then, of course, we had all the songs, the chants and so on that the fans sing. And these were all from recordings that we'd done as part of the work with Manchester City, because we had lots of microphones around the stadium. We had all these fantastic recordings. And Sky had initially sent us every microphone feed from every game they covered the season beforehand when we were working with that stuff. So we had lots of these crowd sounds, and we picked up different chants and so on from different places and put this together. And they started putting this out on some of the live games when it went back, and it went down really well. People really liked it. It was like, you know, they can hear themselves in the crowd. It was authentic because it was that crowd. And that, you know, that was brilliant. And then we got a call from CBS out of the blue saying we've got the National Women's Soccer League coming back for a tournament, first sport back in the US. And would you do the sound for it? I said, yes, of course we will. So we put together a completely different set of samples, completely different set of loops, all different things. They sent us lots and lots of material that we edited a load of stuff together and integrated that into some of the tech that we developed for the kind of broadcast automation with this new interface. And the first game went out on the Saturday, which was a record viewers that they'd ever had for the event. I mean, not just because of us, it was the first sport on TV.
Of course, because of you.
We'd like to take some of the credit for that. And that went out on the Saturday, and then Vista World Link, who were the outside broadcaster, got a phone call on the Monday from MLS, the league, saying, who did your crowd sound? And can we have their contact details? So then we had, I think, 4 different MLS clubs that we were providing all the sound for. And then the USL clubs, the next tier down, got in touch. So we were doing all this, basically spent the whole of a year editing all these loops and samples and patches together and making these things and shipping out Microsoft Surfaces to the US so that they could control them. And then Big Ten Network, one of the very large kind of college football networks in the US, got in touch, and they wanted us to do the same thing for a bunch of their clubs, for a whole league. And then we ended up doing men's and women's basketball. We did men's and women's ice hockey. We did soccer, of course. We did American football. We did, and expanded out into all these different sports. So what was going to be an absolutely catastrophic year for us actually ended up being really good. And with the kind of income that we generated from that, we managed to expand the company. We took on a new developer. We kept on working on our core stuff, which is the broadcast automation work. And we're now working with various broadcasters. We've got a bunch of trials going on. We've just come out of a big project with BT, where we're taking it kind of beyond conventional broadcast and so on. So it's super exciting. We got a lot of interesting academic papers out of it. We got lots and lots of really good contacts through doing the virtual crowd stuff, which then, of course, they already trust us to deliver so that it works when we launched the kind of next gen version of our MixAir software, which is the broadcast automation, back in November.
I mean, I want to get to that in a moment. I wanted to get a sense of really what was in place before this became possible. So if you give people a sense of how did the kind of acoustic mix work before your technology? I imagine like a football field, you've got microphones all around the pitch, and you have a producer that's essentially sort of pushing up the volume of one and down on another as the game plays out, or how did it work? Was it more manual?
That's exactly it. So you have typically 12 or 13 microphones around the pitch, all shotgun microphones pointing in towards the pitch. And you've got a crowd microphone, an ambisonic microphone hanging from the gantry. And the sound supervisor, who's in the outside broadcast truck, his main role, the thing that he spends most of his time doing, is chasing the ball around with the faders. Because if you leave them all up, it just sounds horrible. You never hear a ball kick. So he's always trying to make sure that the microphone nearest the ball is the one that's raised in the mix. And if you listen carefully, especially if you've got an immersive audio system like Atmos or even 5.1, you can hear the fader movements and so on going on. It's it's quite clear. So it's quite an intensive job. And the same person that's doing that is also responsible for everything else audio on the site. So a game that we were at, I think it was the Manchester City Liverpool game that was essentially the title decider the year before, and the comms link went down between the producer and the vision guys, I think, and the sound supervisor just had to abandon the desk and forget all about the on-pitch mix while he sorted out this other problem. So we were essentially providing a technology which would do all that hard work for them and allow them to focus on crafting a really good mix instead of chasing the ball around the field with the faders. This
is designed principally for like a televisual audience, because obviously so many experiences now are perhaps best listened to with headphones on, or how do you sort of design that for, I guess, a variety of types of uses?
So because we're working object-based under the hood, if you like, in the software, we can output in any format at all. So for Manchester City, for their fan experience mixes, putting the distant fan in the best seat of the house at the Etihad, we were outputting, I think, 5.1 for their OTT platform, stereo for the YouTube, and binaural, so immersive audio over headphones for people watching on mobile devices. And we could do all that simultaneously from the same piece of software. Instead of having 3 guys chasing the ball around and doing the mix, we could do all of that simultaneously.
And I mean, like, I have to ask a little bit about the live experience as well, because one assumes that the live experience is best enjoyed without any headphones on. But are there live experiences that are enhanced by having headphones in and then perhaps utilizing this? So what's your sense of that?
I suspect so. Trying to think of a good example. So the way we mix the live, like let's say a football game. If
Yeah.
you're actually in the crowd at a football game, you can hear all the crowd around you and so on, but just the crowd around you, not the larger stadium. And you rarely hear a ball kick. The only reason you hear the ball kicks on TV is because there's a guy behind a desk chasing the ball with the faders, and they're trying to get it so that you can hear every ball. Whereas the mixes that we create, you can have the whole crowd, the huge extent of the stadium and so on, but you can also have those big ball kicks and so on. Now, that's whether you'd want that actually in a stadium, maybe not. But we could do the same thing over. So one of the things we were going to do just before the pandemic struck, of course, was they had a city football club kind of sport bar in New York, and we were going to put an immersive loudspeaker system in there and do the game in this sports bar in New York, which would have been a lot of fun. And they'd have had a very different experience of a live event.
Yeah, and I think that's what's interesting is because we hear so much about making things even more immersive now, and I think that's a really exciting part of the technology around us. It sounds like you've had a remarkable pandemic in terms of research terms, and I wonder, has it also kind of pushed on your sort of innovation over that period? Have you sort of done things that you wouldn't have done otherwise, and got to a point with Salsa Sound that's perhaps different than it would have otherwise been had you not had to do that?
Well, very much so. I mean, it accelerated everything so we could expand, and we got a really good developer in about 18 months ago now, who's allowed us to extend what we do with the artificial intelligence. So rather than initially we were just creating the on-pitch mix, and the latest version of the software that launched in November will mix in multiple commentators, multiple crowd mics, the presentation from the TV studio, and it will do all of that, and it can output 100 different mixes if you want, for different audiences, different broadcasters with different languages in different formats, and it can do it all automatically in real time. So wow. We would never have got to that place. And one of the big learning experiences from putting together the V Crowd thing, remember we talked about it being like a crowd DJ so that anybody could operate it that understood the game. I think when Fulham used it in their stadium, they had the kit man who was a DJ outside of the club. He was the operator for it. So literally anybody could do it. The producer could do it. Didn't need to be a specialist audio guy. So we learned a lot about the importance of a really simple, intuitive user interface and making it super easy to use. So back before the pandemic, the automated mix software was in a piece of hardware in a rack mount unit, which had a web page that you could interact with a load of different controls and things like that. And now it's a really simple user interface where you are literally dragging and dropping the elements that you want in a particular mix down to that mix. So it gave us a lot of lessons in making in really good user interface design, I think.
I think one of the things we often think in relation to especially sort of elite sports events, big events, is that the best seat in the house is often where the media are located in the stadium. And I wonder, do you go as far as to suggest that the audio sounds better if you're watching from remotely rather than in the stadium? How do those two experiences compare, do you think, in this era of AI-backed soundscapes?
Yeah, I disagree with the first bit of it, because most of our experience at football games with the outside broadcast crew is inside a truck in the car park outside the stadium. But I take your point. Yeah, it can sound better for sure. I mean, it's not the same as being in the live event, but it can certainly sound improved. Like I say, you can have all those. You can personalize what you want to hear, and not just have what's there, essentially. So that might be that you want it more immersive. It might be get rid of the commentator. It might be I don't want to hear the away fans. I just want to hear the home fans. It might be you want that big, those kind of hyper real kicks and the big sounds and so on. So you can kind of tailor it to it's that element of personalization again, going back to what got me started on the whole thing. It's the kind of being able to personalize the experience for what your preference is.
Yeah, and so of course people still will sit in a stadium and listen to the radio commentary whilst they're there as well, which is, I think, just a good example of how, I guess, varied people's audio experiences are at events. I mean, it sounds like there's so much impact from what you've done already. What's happening next? What's the next stage for this now?
Well, we're continuing to kind of push this out, and we're still training the neural network more to improve it, and we're training it across different sports now as well. So we're working across kind of ice hockey, basketball, a bunch of other things for actual broadcast rather than for the pandemic virtual crowd thing. We've just come out, or just about to finish a project with BT, Condensed Reality, and others, called the 5G Edge XR project, and it's using edge compute and 5G to do all of this stuff in the cloud. So we're moving our technology into the cloud so that all the processing and the automated mixing is happening in a server somewhere, and it doesn't have to be physically at the event. Anything that has to be at the event is the microphones, essentially. The other thing we're doing a lot of work on is different kind of formats, so not just conventional broadcast, but looking at kind of extended reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, and so on. So on the 5G Edge XR project, you could have the entire football game on your coffee table if you wanted to. You could have the MotoGP use case was my favorite, and you could have the MotoGP circuit as like a scale extra track in your living room, and track the action as it was going around your settee.
Wow.
That's and incredible. Apart from that, there's a bunch of work we're doing with a few different clients on making more use of the data that we're getting, because as part of generating this automated mix, we know where every ball kick happened and when. We know where every whistle blow happened and when. We know an awful lot of information about what's going on. So we're starting to make more use of that data to drive automatic highlights generation, to drive all sorts of things you might use data for. So essentially, not just using the microphones as ways of capturing audio, but as ways of gathering data.
And are you using the same number of microphones? Is it the same sort of setup technologically in the stadium, or has that changed as well alongside?
Yeah, we made a decision very early on that people would be very unlikely to buy our technology if they had to buy a load of microphones and put a load of extra infrastructure in. So we started off saying we're just going to use the kit that's already at the ground from the broadcasters. And for the fan experience stuff that we did with Manchester City and that we've done more recently with Arsenal, we've been working with them. We put a couple of extra crowd microphones in so that you could mix that in different ways, and you could be with the away supporters or the home supporters, or you could have, we had a competition going on at Arsenal as to which end of the ground made the loudest noise and were more engaged with it. So we've got crowd analytics going on. There's another neural network doing some crowd analytic to understand how the crowd's responding to different things. So sometimes we put a couple of extra microphones in, but mostly it's those 13 mics around the pitch.
I see. And I feel like I've got to ask you, one of the things I mentioned at the start is that people have such varied journeys into their research. But I think also over the research career, there's so much change as well. It sounds like with this particular project, but with the subject generally, you must have to upskill so much in your work to keep up with the technology. I mean, how's your sort of research expertise evolved over that period?
Oh, a lot. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of the benefits of being in a university research environment is that we're always working with people, collaborating with people, working with people, and communicating with people who are the ones who are working on the next generation of stuff behind the scenes, the stuff that's not seen by consumers and so on yet. So it's a huge advantage in that way. So, the example of that object-based audio was a really good one. So we were working in that in 2010, and it never became a thing for 10 years after that. It was never really talked about, and now it's rolling out in multiple regions around the globe. So it's, I guess, the industry interaction, the interaction with researchers and industry, that kind of thing helps keep you up to date. But you're right, it changes really fast.
And it feels like almost every conversation I have with researchers these days has artificial intelligence somewhere in the mix, which so it sounds like a big part of this, certainly. Well, look, it's fantastic to hear about this work. The impact internationally is just absolutely remarkable. And especially congratulations for keeping it going over the pandemic when all of us were dealing with incredible challenges. And yeah, congratulations. It looks like it's a lot more work to do to keep it going. And I'm sure you'll do an incredible job at taking it to the next stage. So thanks for joining me here today. And yeah, look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks for that, Andy. See you soon.
All right. Cheers and bye-bye.